Campaign 2020 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Quick Trip, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, and Wisconsin Operating Engineers Local 139.
State Representative Joel Kitchens of Sturgeon Bay is a Republican seeking re-election in the 1st Assembly District. Joel, welcome back to WisconsinEye.
Well, thanks, Steve. Always a pleasure to talk to you.
Give us an update on water issues, especially in light of PFAS in the 1st District, in Northeast Wisconsin.
Yeah, well, I represent Kewaunee County, which has sort of been the poster child for contaminated wells in the state, although our issues are not really any worse than a lot of areas in the state. And we've been making very good progress. And my philosophy on those issues has always been to work together with the farmers. And so we've had a good number of legislative bills, sorry about that have passed that have had the support of the agricultural groups as well as the conservation groups. So that's always my goal. PFAS, that's an emerging contaminant. And in my area in particular, people don't at this point feel like it's a problem. But I believe that we are going to determine that it's a problem everywhere in the state. Right now, Marinette is getting the most attention because they've documented that they've had some high levels. So, I'm the chair of the Environment Committee, and it's something that we'll continue to work on. We made some progress with the firefighting foams, but the science so far is not really there to know, what levels are acceptable. There's just so much we have to learn yet. We want to stay on the very edge of this and get it under control, but we're sort of waiting for the science to catch up a little bit too.
Well, it was interesting. The DNR just warned that you should not eat the liver of deer from the Marinette area because of the threat of PFAS. That was just fascinating.
Yeah. Again, I think we're just getting into this, and we're going to discover it's present in a lot of other areas besides that. But right. It's a challenge to get legislation done when people only think it's in one area. So I think until the rest of the representatives understand that this is going to affect them too, it's tough.
Right. Well, we're in the middle of this pandemic. So a question, if the pandemic means we don't collect $1 billion, I'll make up a number, $1 billion in state taxes, what would be your approach to making up that shortfall in the next budget?
Well, first off, I think that the estimates have come back much better than we initially anticipated. We thought it was going to be, really bad with our tax revenue. So I don't think it will be as bad. Our economy in Wisconsin prior to the pandemic was arguably the best it's been in our history. And I think we are poised to make a very good comeback. Our rainy day fund was the highest it's ever been. And certainly if there was ever a time that called for a rainy day fund, this will be it. So that certainly will cover a good bit of whatever shortfall that we have. I'm feeling cautiously optimistic that we will not have to touch things like education in particular during this school year, because it would be awfully difficult for schools in the middle of a school year to then get a reduction in their revenues because they've already done all their hiring and all of that kind of thing. So, my approach is going to be that we really can't raise taxes. I think that the reason that our economy has done so well is because we've created a very good business climate in Wisconsin, which did not used to be the case at all. My opponent right away has said she wants to raise corporate tax rates. Well, we don't want to go back to that where we have such a poor business climate. We need to stay the course. And I think if we do that, our economy is poised to bounce back very well. So we'll have to make some short-term cuts this year, I believe. But I'm very confident we'll come back and be very strong.
Last week, the governor extended the statewide mask edict until November 21. You support extending that, Joel?
That's an issue that I wish had been handled differently from the start. I wish if we could have not politicized this and just explain to people why it's important, because it is important for people to wear masks and to do all of those things to reduce the spread as much as possible. President Trump is not blameless in this, but then also from the governor, he even put in his mandate that it's okay to not wear them while you're sleeping. I think if we could treat people like adults and explain the importance of it, we'd get better compliance. As far as the mandate, I did not want to rescind it, but I do believe that it was an overreach on his part. I don't think this was legal what he did now, and I suspect it will be overturned. And I don't think we will have I don't think the votes are there for us to come back in and put it in place. So I think that's what's going to happen. So I believe it's going to fall on the local governments, and I'm going to be supportive of them. I've already reached out to Door County and gotten them the legal advice that it is legal for our local governments to do a mandate themselves. So I think that's the route that we're going to end up going. But I do want to encourage people to wear masks. I think it is important, and I wish we could take the politics out of it.
The role that hospitals have played in treating COVID-19, especially with the record number of hospitalizations in Wisconsin. In the next state budget, should hospitals be an even greater priority than they may be in the current one?
I certainly think it's going to be something we're going to need to look at, because our hospitals took a huge hit during the pandemic. They basically shut down, and they certainly didn't do anything elective during that time. So they had huge losses. And so we're going to have to look at that carefully, obviously. I think that the CARES Act money helped. A good bit of it came to them. So, again, without seeing the final numbers, I can't say for sure, but I certainly think it's a conversation we're going to have.
Have you signed on the Rep. Bourne and Senator Capping a bill which says if you're a organization, nonprofit, and you comply with COVID-19 protocols, you could not face a COVID-19 lawsuit? Is that something you're on?
I plan to be on it. I'm not sure if I signed on or not, but I do plan to be on that. I think it is an important piece of legislation. If businesses are doing everything right, if they're following the accepted protocols and they still have a problem, whether it's with a customer or with an employee, they should not be caught up in court for that. And the way our court system works is so often they end up having to settle out of court because it's easier and less expensive than fighting it. But if they're not doing anything wrong, I do believe that we need to protect them from frivolous lawsuits on this. I just think that would be really damaging, again, to our business climate and to our economy if those businesses had to absorb that right now, with already most of them struggling to get back on their feet.
The debate over policing reforms, we've seen it play out the last 4 or 5 months nationally and even in Kenosha. The speaker's going to form a task force. The governor's got 9 bills. Senator Wangard has got 8 or 9. The Black Caucus has bills. Are there any specific policing reforms that you think should be enacted into law?
I think we need to go through the process. The governor he did call us into special session to consider those bills. And people don't understand that we don't go into session to discuss things and work out compromises and that kind of thing. We go in there to vote on bills. And these are really important bills with life and death consequences. And they deserve to go through committee and have public hearings. For instance, the ban on no-knock warrants. I'm not comfortable voting on that without hearing what law enforcement has to say about it and having it go through the hearing process. I suspect to go politely knock on the door of a gang house might endanger the lives of police officers. So I want to have those discussions. There are none of those bills that I don't think are worth considering. I certainly think, though, that in talking to my law enforcement, there are a number of them that we're already doing those things. Really things like chokeholds. I don't know of a single police department that condones using chokeholds. So, I want to do that. I think we've had very good results with our task forces in the past, and I think we will out of this, because I think we need to look at the whole problem here, not just what police are doing, but there's just so much more involved in what is happening with this. So I think that it's very important that we go through the process. I know it takes a little longer, but I think it's much more likely that we'll have meaningful results in the end if we do that.
Another criminal justice issue is the legalization of medical and recreational marijuana. Can you remind me of your position on those, please?
Sure. I do believe that marijuana does have medicinal value. So I will support it if it comes forward for medical marijuana. I say that somewhat reluctantly, though, as a veterinarian who has worked with pharmaceuticals and that kind of thing. We have the FDA there for a reason. They should be, guaranteeing that what you buy is what it says on the label, and we should have the medical studies saying what conditions does it work for and which ones does it not work for. Right now, it's even with CBD oil, it's sort of the Wild West. You don't know what you're really getting. So I will reluctantly do it, but I wish the federal government would take this on and do it right. As far as recreational marijuana, I'm not there yet. I think that, we're seeing a lot of problems in the states that have legalized it, and certainly the law enforcement community in places like Colorado, they have said don't do it. So I think we have a long way to go on that to get to the point where I would be comfortable with it. But medical marijuana, I think it is something that needs to move forward. I do believe there are conditions that would benefit from that.
Your position on the governor's People's Maps Commission to draw the next set of congressional and legislative district lines and then forward to the legislature to be enacted?
Well, first off, I think the governor doing a People's Commission, nonpartisan People's Commission is sort of a silly idea. He wouldn't like it very well if we came up with what we call a nonpartisan commission to do that. And the governor really does not have a role in this. Our Constitution says it's the legislature. I have signed on to the bill to come up with a nonpartisan redistricting process. I would be comfortable with that if it's done right, if it respects government boundaries and that kind of thing. I could get there with that. This session, it's going to go through the legislature. The governor, I'm sure won't sign that, so it'll end up being in the courts. So, I think we will go through that. I do have to say, though, that I think that the effects of redistricting has been, grossly exaggerated. I think that the reason the maps right now favor Republicans is because Democrats are just so incredibly concentrated in Dana and Milwaukee counties, and then Republicans basically have a somewhat narrow majority in the rest of the state. So that's sort of the main reason that it does favor Republicans at the moment. But I do support the nonpartisan redistricting process, sort of the Iowa model, just because I think that it has caused people to lose faith in the representation and to question whether they're really being represented fairly. So I would be okay with that if it's done right.
Wisconsin is a high property tax state, which is why local governments, school districts have been living with caps on their property taxes for more than 20 years. If you're reelected of voting on the next state budget, should those caps on property tax levies stay in place?
I was a school board president for many years, so I certainly understand that and understand the problems that they can cause, because it's impossible to come up with a formula that's completely fair to everyone. I do think with schools at this point, they've become so accustomed to it that if the school does a good job and explains it, the referendums have had a very high success rate. Our municipalities aren't to that point yet. They don't have that kind of public acceptance. I'm certainly supportive of being able to tweak that. I think that the municipalities that are not growing or declining, I think they're very much hurt by the formula the way that it is. So, I'm certainly open to looking at that. I think, though, that the public does support having some sort of revenue limits. Prior to those, as I recall, property taxes were going up something in the range of 8% a year. And I think especially for our senior citizens that are on a fixed income, we need to provide some sort of surety that your property taxes will not go up, dramatically like that, and that you'll have a say if the local governments want to increase those taxes.
Is it time to consider alternative revenue sources for cities, villages, and towns? The Representative Goyke, as you know, has got a bill that says if Milwaukee passed a referendum, they could levy a 50-cent sales tax. Is it time to give those local governments revenue options to reduce their reliance on the property tax?
Yeah, as long as it's done by referendum, I'm pretty supportive of that. We had a bill that came forward, a few years ago, somewhat along those lines, and it looked like it was going to go through and ended up not happening in the end. But I'm certainly open to looking at all of those different options. Again, as long as it's passed by the people, I'm open to that.
The governor last year, as you know, recommended raising the fuel tax, 30.9 cents a gallon, hasn't been raised in 10 or 12 years. You open to considering a gas tax hike?
Yeah, transportation funding has been one of the most controversial things, I should say, in the budget in the last few years. We just can't find consensus between the Assembly, the Senate, and the governor on that. The problem has been, of course, that our cars are getting much better mileage than they did long ago, or not even very many years ago. And under Governor Doyle, they got rid of indexing where the gas tax would rise with the price of fuel. So it just put us on a collision course with disaster. And so we absolutely have to have a sustainable source of funding. I have been in favor of raising the gasoline tax modestly in the past, and I'll continue. It does seem a little odd to me that the governor thinks that that's a sustainable method going forward, though, as supportive as he has been of green energies, that he would think a gas tax is going to be sustainable. We put in $2 million in the last budget to explore another option, so that we would be basically charging a user fee for our roads. And there are other states that have done it in many innovative ways, whether it's tolling or whatever. And unfortunately, the governor vetoed that out, because I think that would be a much more sustainable way to do it. I think doing the registration fees, as we ended up doing in the end, is not a good way, because it's in the ballpark of 25% of the cars on our roads in Wisconsin are from out of state, so they should be paying for our roads too. We certainly pay for Illinois' roads when we go there.
Yeah. When a school, you're a former school board member. When a school board or a local government plans a major public works project, should they have to give a preference to Wisconsin businesses?
I would never want to put that into law. I certainly have faith in our Wisconsin businesses to be able to compete with businesses from anywhere. And actually, I have in the past fought against other states that have tried to keep our businesses out. So it'd be a little hypocritical to say that we don't want an open market in Wisconsin. I think that there should be some. I mean, if it's even, I would hope that they would prefer to do it in Wisconsin or locally. That's how we did it, sort of on the school board. If it's a close bid. But as far as putting a mandate on it, I just think that you would increase costs, and especially with the revenue limits we've been talking about, I don't think that would be fair to the taxpayers to have to do that. And oftentimes if you did that, you would end up with one or two people bidding, and that's just not, good for the taxpayers.
Finally, you mentioned one difference with your opponent. Do you want to highlight any others on November 3, Joe?
Honestly, I think probably the biggest difference between me and her is I'm a problem solver. I'm sure everybody that does your interviews will tell you that, they're going to come in there and they're going to work across the aisle. Well, I've proven that I can do that. This summer I wrote a bill with a Democrat on emergency elections procedures. And although it was too late to get it passed into law, most of the things that came out of that were adopted by the Elections Commission. So I've proven time and again that I can work with the other side. And, most of these people that say they're going to do that, they get in there and then they don't do it because there's a lot of pressure not to. So, I've passed many, many bills that have had bipartisan support. Her approach, both in this campaign and in her prior life, has been sort of a bomb thrower, where she's very good at pointing out the problems, but when you look at what she's offering as solutions, they're very simplistic, and they don't really address the problem at all. I think the groundwater is a perfect example. I talked about the things I've done and how I did it on a bipartisan, or brought the two sides together. Her approach is that we should go back to small farms. Well, that's not a solution at all. That's simply not going to happen with the farm economy today. I mean, there certainly is a great place for small farms, but on a large scale, we're not going to go back to that. And I guess the other difference I would say is that I view this as more than a full-time job. Whether we're in session or not, I'm putting in more than 40 hours a week. And she has said, I'll have time to run my restaurant because we're not in session in the winter. Well, that's sort of like saying I can play for the Packers because my Sundays are free. That's, what you see is just the tip of the iceberg in the floor sessions. And this is very, very much a full-time job.
Okay, thank you. State Representative Joel Kitchens of Sturgeon Bay is a Republican seeking re-election in the 1st Assembly District. The election is November 3. Joel, thank you for talking to WisconsinEye.
Thanks, Steve. Always a pleasure.
Take care. Have a good day.
Campaign 2020 is sponsored by Wisconsin Hospital Association, Quick Trip, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Realtors Association, and Wisconsin Operating Engineers Local 139.